Welcome everyone to this webinar. My name is Stephen McCauley, and on behalf of NZIPIM, I will be hosting this event. In this webinar, Ryan Luckman from the Veterinary Centre Waimate, based in South Canterbury, will outline how his clients are using cow collar technology to help make better on-farm decisions. Ryan will describe how electronic cow collar technology is currently being used on-farm in providing real-time data to increase animal production and on-farm financial performance. Before we get underway, I wish to note that this webinar will be in listen-only mode. If you're having any trouble with the webinar, please lodge a question via the sidebar at the top right-hand side of your screen. And questions for our presenter can be asked via the question sidebar at any stage during the presentation and at the end of the presentation. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenter, Ryan Luckman. Ryan completed a Bachelor of Veterinary Science at Massey University in 2007. Upon graduating, he joined the Veterinary Centre Waimate and is a veterinarian partner and dairy team leader within the practice. So Ryan, welcome and over to you.
Hey, nice to see everyone. Welcome to this talk on electronic cow collars. We're based down in South Canterbury, quite a few cows, and make sure that, working now. So I guess across our practice, I guess one of the reasons we've been asked to talk about this is we've had quite a decent uptake of cow technology. So we're sitting around 45 farms with Allflex collars, 3 with Cow Manager, 2 with GEA, and 1 with AFI. And the branch that I work out of, about 39% of our herds have some form of cow collar technology on. So you'll see probably the standout figure there is the 33% with Allflex. And so what I'll concentrate on for this talk is what we use, especially in terms of the Allflex farms and the data and how we integrate that into our practice, and just run over some of the reasons why I guess we focus on the Allflex stuff in particular. So I guess just as a first quick overview, at a really basic level, most of these collars or collar technology will do three key things. They'll give you your heats, so that's the one on the left. You get a massive increase in activity, a drop in rumination, get a heat event. Your health, so your sick cows, your distressed cows, stuff like that. And then probably the one which is less concentrated on in the New Zealand situation at the moment, the rumination data. If we go back to the wee collar, the magic blue thing on the left, on the right of the cow there, sits there and does some. It basically takes readings readings all the time, bunches them up into 2-hour blocks, and then turns them into, through some voodoo magic, which I don't understand, turns them into algorithms to give you all this kind of data around heat activity, health, and all this kind of stuff. So I guess we first, we're pretty lucky we had some early adopters across our practice, especially in the Allflex technology. And I guess one of the major reasons, and probably many of your people you work with may adopt them, is around the heat detection. So it's often seen as the holy grail, that it will, solve all their farm's problems, because you can now pick the cows, even for convenience, not having to stand up on the platform for 6 hours or so, or 3 hours. Then that's really good, and it really has made a difference on a lot of our farms in terms of just the use of heat detection. So we got really involved in it after lockdown last year. I was sitting bored at home because we couldn't go into work, and one of the things I've always wanted to work on is this. If we go back to this heat detection thing, we know that across our practice, heat detection is having a huge issue on many of our farms, and we thought with this data that comes out of the Allflex technology, we get a whole lot of handy information around when it's on heat, when it started cycling, its breeding window, how many hours it's got until the end of the AI period, which is basically, if you look at this graph here, which comes from Allflex research, the data is counting down from a 26-hour window from an activity peak until the closer you get down to zero, the more likely you are to essentially be ovulating. So we thought, with all this data that we've got access to, could we design or look at a test using ovary scanning to detect, or to analyze whether cows are actually on heat or not? Because at the moment, when we look at our farms that we want to analyze for heat detection, we really only get to look at the data retrospectively. So we'll sit there and look at, you know, heat non-return rates or return rates, your return intervals, submission rates, and your fertility focus reports, and we'll say, right, and this is in March after we've scanned, and we'll say, right, heat detection was probably an issue, but 90% of the time, farmers come back to us and say, oh no, it can't be heat detection, I'm a really good heat detector. So long story short, because when I normally go into the stats side of this discussion, people fall asleep, but using all that data that we took, that I just showed you there quickly, we were able to basically scan ovaries, combine it with this data from the Allflex collars, and come up with a test which could determine the likelihood that a cow is in an optimal mating window or not. We then wrap this up into a package which we take out to our commercial farms, so that are non-collared farms, wrap this up and go out to them and say, right, we'll scan all your on-heat cows for the day, anything that's cycled, and we'll give you a objective score based on this test, and based on that, we'll see how you're actually tracking in terms of your heat detection.
Ryan, could you maybe just go back to that spreadsheet you showed before, a couple of slides back? So when you're looking at this data, what are those 2-3 key things along the spreadsheet that you're looking for as part of an indicator in and around heats and that sort of thing?
Okay. Yes, do keep asking me, because I live in this data wheel, so I forget that you guys probably haven't seen this. So if you look across this, the key things are going to be things like your days from last cycle. This one to the right here, heat index is one of the main ones, which is basically saying it's something, there's a whole lot of inputs that are built into the algorithms in these machines. So in this one, it will be things like down here, how much of an increase in activity they had, how much of a decrease in eating they had because they've formed these sexually active groups, how much of a deviation from their normal timeline, what is the days since their last cycle. They all factor into a score. So 100 is kind of the top score, and so if you get 100 heat index, you can pretty much take that onto the bank as a really strong heat. And that goes down all the way to in the 32 to 50 score range, or 32 to 50 is what we consider as silent heats. So last year we had one of our AI techs put collars on, he had scratchies on, and he was getting a heap of these low heat index scores, so 32 to 50s. Nothing on the scratchies, so they really were sitting in this silent heat range, but because he was AIing them, he was able to self-validate that they really truly were on. So you're getting the full gamut in the heat index from your silent heats through to your roaring heats. The breeding window here is the other key one that we'd be looking at, especially if you're using different semen selection or wanting to optimize your conception rates. This is breeding window is counting down 26 hours from the very top of this green diamond, which is the top of your activity peak. And if we go to this next slide here, what Allflex have worked on is that between 23 and 8 hours, you're likely to have the highest conception rates. So yeah, essentially within that, if you're trying to optimize, say, conception rates, or say you're using sex semen, we alter those algorithms slightly, or those decision trees slightly. But if you go back here, you could say, right, one of the best cows that we could make today, this one here, the top one, it's cycled 21 days ago, in an optimal breeding window has got the equal highest heat index. Well, she's also an 8-year-old, so we probably wouldn't choose her as the top, but yeah, so you can use all those to choose your winners, I guess, in terms of that mating program. Does that explain that?
Thanks, Ryan. Very good.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, if we go back, so we had all this data, and so all those stuff we just talked about. We then used ovary scanning to create a test which said, look, what is the likelihood you're actually in this green pit? So that's time for best time for AI, and it actually came out as a really good test. The collars, I mean, well, like scientifically and just from observation, are pretty incredible at picking up heats and beat us hands down. And this kind of validates this a bit. So this was when we went out to commercial farms and assessed their heat detection skills based on the test that we'd validated, which we called heat check. We were able to give them an objective score of the percentage of heats that were likely to be in that green optimal mating window. So if you see that orange line at the top there, I think at about 96.5%, that is what the collars were performing at, so a really high level. You see bar number 11 there, which is, so each of these bars, 1 to 12, are 12 different farms that we used in the trial who are non-collar farms that we compared the results to. Number 11 was a reference farm that we used, who was, I guess we'd chosen them. They were probably what we considered on paper and performance-wise to be our best heat detectors in the practice. And they were able to perform at the same level as the collars in terms of presenting cows that were truly on heat. There's other discussions to be had around missed heats, like the silent heats that we talked about before. But as you can see, for the majority down here, there's quite a lot of gap between, I guess, their real world performance and the performance that we're seeing in the collars. And just as a note, often people look at number 12 and say, oh, there was a farm outperforming the collars. This was a farm that was actually referred to us by the AI tech because the heat detection was so poor. But on the day before we came out, they repainted the tail paint, touched up tail paint, and only presented cows that were dripping with blood from being ridden. So they performed really well on the day of the test, but I think seasonally didn't really learn a lot from the process.
So Ryan, what should we draw from this graph? I'm just trying to understand in terms of what are you trying to explain here?
So essentially, this is kind of validating what we see. Well, I guess we see from data all the time that heat detection on commercial farms is probably pretty poor and probably having a major impact on reproductive performance. When we go and objectively measure that heat detection performance against, I guess, a gold standard test, the collars, then, I mean, it's just highlighting that this difference is real. So we can go in and improve that. But I guess for us, it was a way for us to build a system that we could actually go and help commercial farmers and to improve their heat detection, but probably just backs up what we already knew by gut feel. And I guess interpreting data is that heat detection is playing a massive, it is a massive hurdle or a massive limitation on many of our farms in terms of heat or reproductive performance.
Thanks, Ron.
So, and I mean, this spreadsheet, which is some results from our last season farms who just put collars on. So the top 5 farms here had put collars on this season, either during mating or just before mating. So, and what we see with the first year of collars is if you've done no other changes, if you've done absolutely nothing else, essentially any rise in, say, 3-week in calf rates, emission rate, 6-week in calf rate, anything like that, is just as a result of removing the factor of heat detection from the equation. And some of the farmers on these farms, you know, I'd have called them above average farmers. I thought their heat detection wasn't actually that bad. But if you see if the only changes you've had and you're getting 6, 11, 5, 4, 6%, 6 week and 3 week in calf rate rises, then heat detection really is playing a massive role on these farms.
So Ryan, just talk me through the ledgers in terms of the boxes on the left and also up top. If you could just give us some insights in terms of if you're trying to get a better understanding of the results, what are the ledgers?
Okay, so to the left here is just a code name, so I know which farms they are, but you don't. So 5 different farms here, and I'll talk about these bottom 2 in a second, who had just put collars on. This is the 3 week in calf rate from 2019-20 versus 2021, and same with 6 week in calf rate, conception rate, not in calf rate, and mating week. Just highlighted in all these boxes is the difference. So if it's in green, it's increased. If it's in red, it's decreased. So you can see here for the farms that put collars on last year, those 5 farms, we had between a -3. So this -3% farm in terms of 3 week in calf rate are a farm that put the collars on just before the plan started mating. Normally they would do a lot of cedar or non-cycler intervention, which they delayed until start of the second round in this one. So that's why their 3 week submission rate was down quite a bit. But they cancelled that out by week 6 and made up an extra 4%. Yeah, on the whole, on the most of them who were really high cedar users, it was a 3 to 11% rise. For the 6 week in calf rate, a 1 to 6% rise across these farms. Conception rate we won't talk about. Interestingly, so not in calf rate, the drop on 3 of these farms was partly explained by a reasonably poor performance the year before. So they had a lot more late calvers who ended up empty rather than pregnant from the year before. So that was the key driver in these calving spread. So that's all really good, so we know that, and this is probably the easy win power of these this collar technology, is you can put a collar on, and we know from data from Allflex, you put a collar on, and we're likely to see a big improvement just by removing heat detection as an issue. However, if we look at the farms below here, these 2 here, they've actually had collars on for 2 to 3 seasons. And so you can see the variation here. So we've gone -2, -6. In the first year, we took out the effects of heat detection, but now what we're seeing is just variation season to season, because he hasn't, I guess, changed his system on the back of it. He hasn't altered, he hasn't looked at anything. So therefore, all we're seeing is season to season, there's been a drop in repro performance, which is actually what we saw regionally at our practice last year, just with climatic condition. That 6 week in calf rates were down quite a bit. So we've removed the heat detection. So I guess from our practice, the next step was, what do we do now? We know that we know that we can remove heat detection, but what else can we do to improve the farm? Because everyone asks, and probably rightly so, why aren't these collar farms who've had them on for a couple of years, why aren't they our top repro performers? I guess the answer is that they're not our top repro performers, because all we've done so far is take out heat detection as the issue. And if heat detection was the only issue on all farms, it would be a very easy way to fix the dairy industry. So then that's when we got really quite heavily involved in analysing data. One of the cool things, so this is the background of the Allflex system. So within the system, you can create your own custom reports, you can pull out all the data. So if we looked at, say, the health and the repro and the rumination data, those are 3, I guess, key metrics that they are presented to you and ready to easily to digest bites. But in behind the system, all the data that is flowing into those is sitting. So if you can dream it on these systems or in the Allflex system, you can analyze the data, pull it out, look at it retrospectively, it lives there forever. And so it enables you to look at data really in depth and look for patterns, benchmark different clients and see what's going on. So this is one of the things that we started looking at quite heavily last year. And one of the first things that we stumbled upon that we thought was going to have quite a big impact was the transition period. So in this graph here, what we've done is taken, you see down the bottom, we've got cows going from day 0 to day 30. So we've taken every cow and compared the day 0 of every single cow in that herd, the day 1, the day 2. We've got the average rumination rates of 3 different farms, which I'll talk about in a second, running up here. And we're looking at essentially on day 0, we expect you to drop in rumination rate. You've just had a baby, you're worried about having it, and then you're not really too worried about eating. So your appetite will drop, you'll stop eating for the day, and then we want to see you climb steadily out to a normal rumination and a normal appetite. So all of these, if you look at the 100% on the left here, is looking at how long does it take to reach 100%, which is your average rumination rate between days 30 and 40 of calving, which is where it seems to really stabilize across all these herds. So if we look at, I guess, the first farm that we look at, this is the top grey line. This was a farm, most of you will probably have heard of Sue Mackey, nutritionist and farm consultant. We've had her come down and talk to our practice quite often over the last few years. And one of her big go-to methods that she talks about is milking your colostrum cow once a day for, well, as long as they're needed, but usually around 10 to 14 days, with the idea that it gives them time to recover, you lose less, you go into lower negative energy balance, and then they're able to milk better out for the rest of the season, produce more milk, and etc. etc. We luckily had a farm that did that method who also had collars on. So this is this grey line here, and so you can see the recovery rate is, I mean, incredible. Like by day 4, they're at 90-something percentile, and then they just keep steadily climbing. In comparison, this blue line down the bottom is one of our twice-a-day herds who milk their colostrum cows every twice a day, and we saw, like a steady drop and then a very slow climb. So we were kind of only reaching that 80 or just under the 90th percentile about day 10, 11. So the recovery rate was a lot slower. And what became really interesting was this orange line. So the orange line was actually, if we go back to slide, one of these bottom cruciate here, the very bottom head. So he'd also been to the Sue Mackey seminars and was a big believer in the once-a-day system, but he was also a shear milker who got a bit trigger happy. So between days 2 and 5, on a really variable basis, he would drop his once-a-day milking system and go back to a twice-a-day, drop them into the milkers who were twice a day. So you can see up to the point of day 2, everything's going hunky-dory. The recovery rate is matching the grey farm. He then drops them onto twice-a-day milking at a variable rate, and we see a big crash and then a slow rise again, very much in line with the blue twice-a-day colostrum milking line. And I guess the way I think about this is rumination. Most of our farms, and there's a couple of differences, but the majority of our farms, the feeding that goes on in the colostrum period is very similar diet to what's going in the milkers. So if we are having a rumination rate drop by, say, 20%, or a gap of, say, 20 or 30%, then essentially we could infer that that is going to be driven by voluntary feed intake. so that your voluntary feed intake is lower, and therefore, everything being equal, this hole or this gap between the two lines is representing a negative energy balance. And everyone knows about the importance of transition. We always talk about that, poor transition leads to lower cycling, to higher endometriosis rates, the list goes on, more condition loss, etc. So I guess this was interesting to see this validated in real time.
So Ryan, just a question. Just trying to get a sense of the technology itself. So does the technology detect heat as well as rumination in terms of its metrics that it feeds back into a bigger system, or is it all part of the same analytics?
Yeah, so it's very dependent system to system what you can view and what you can get out. I think I've got the portal loaded on here. With the Allflex system, you've got basically 5 dashboards that you can load up the top, plus multiple other reports. And one of the ones that they set up for you is a rumination dashboard. So it purely looks at the average rumination rate of each of your groups, so you can actually track on a daily basis how your feeding levels are going in each of the groups, and what the consistency is like, whether one's up, one's down, etc. Some of the systems use the background rumination data to only drive into, say, heat detection or sick cows, and it's not actually a reportable function that you can view. But yeah, in the Allflex system, the output data and the raw data is viewable.
So do you have any clients who change twice a day based on rumination time?
Yes, so I'll show you, because I guess I'll talk about this one and then I'll talk about the next, what we then did because I guess this was retrospective data, and the next thing we found, if we look at this orange line, because he created, and some cows got chucked out at day 2, cows got chucked out at day 3, 4, 5, and so on. What he created was a huge variation in rumination recovery across the first 7 days. So we then said, right, if we put those into quartiles and say, your lowest total rumination minutes across the first 7 days versus the second quartile, third quartile, and highest quartile, so the top 25%. What did that play out in terms of 6-week and calf rate? And we've broken it down to being only August calvers in here, so that we remove the effective calving date. And when I don't have this on the slide, but the age structure and calving structure of the 4 groups is almost identical. So they ended up being a 10% difference in 6-week and calf rate in the cows that had the worst transition across that period versus the highest. And we analysed this for quite a few farms and it was quite repeatable. So essentially what we were seeing in real time was that, if we go back to this farm down here, which was the bottom line, we know he's only sitting at a 66% 6-week and calf rate last year. How do we improve it? Already we know that his transition, or his poor transition probably in general, is having a massive impact, where we can show a 10% difference in his poorest transition versus best. So that was, I guess, very motivating for a lot of people, so that farmer included. Then we sat down and said, right, how can we, it's all well and good looking back retrospectively and saying, right, your transition was terrible last year, let's see what we can do next year. So we sat down with Allflex and designed this report here, which is basically that same graph in terms of, we go back there, so day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. Looking, this is down here, so days in lactation 1, days in lactation 2, days in lactation 3. So it's the top one is 14 cows that calved on day 1 and their average daily rumination rate was 226 minutes. And so on day 2, 12 cows, 213. Day 3, 7 cows, 186. So this allowed us to track on a daily basis how the herd was going. So we could see, you know, what is your recovery line looking like? And yes, to answer your question, we changed. I mean, almost every farm that had collars on, we had to adjust their transition management to, I guess, fix holes. And there's huge varieties of things like as many things as spring is too tight, not having a drop-in paddock on day 1, cows missing supplement feeding on the day they entered milkers. This one here was literally just underfeeding. They just weren't feeding enough kgs of dry matter. So this was the basis of what allowed us to measure in real time. All of our farmers who had this collars on, how was their transition going, and make changes before it was too late. So then to answer your further question, we actually had quite a lot of farmers across our whole area go to the once-a-day colostrum on the back of the data that we'd shown. And so with the Allflex system, we were able to make it easy. So we had the top left report that we had set up for them, was allowing them to monitor on a daily basis how their actual transition was going. And then we could follow cows. So the next 2 boxes on the middle row, the ones on the left and the next one to it, on a daily basis, we could say, right, we want to keep the cows on once a day for 10 days. At 10, we want to split cows that have either recovered to, so we've set up parameters in the back of what an acceptable recovery was, or not recovered. And then farmers would have this report here, which is highlighted with the orange box around it, set up so that they automatically drafted their once-a-day colostrum cows or once-a-day milkers into their twice-a-day cows as they reached a recovered level. And so then over on the right-hand side, they got transferred to the twice-a-day group, and then we could also separately monitor the twice-a-day group in terms of their daily rumination, daily eating, and then down the bottom here, we've got the 649 cows on this farm at the moment. In the twice-a-day mob, we can see that there are 8 cows which are maybe needing attention. Have a look at them and decide whether they need to go back into the once-a-day mob for some preferential care.
So Ryan, this report, is this a report that you would use in terms of advising your client about what actions to take, or is it a report that farmers can use as part of their own dashboard in terms of assessing various on-farm management strategies?
So both. So this was set up, so we set it up with the farmers, so it was on their dashboard. They can look at this every day. You know, there's no point relying on us to, you know, go around and have a look and say, well, but we would check in because it's hugely interesting data. So we'd check in quite often and say, oh, you know, this is happening, what's happening. But it was, what happens is when stuff doesn't go right, so say if we go back to this farm, we worked a lot with this farm to sort it out. It creates, I guess, a place to go for the vets as well, the advisors. So we can now look at a structured, I guess, output thing on rumination over the transition period. We know what a standard good line looks like, and you know, we've got say 40 or 50 farms that we're tracking, so we have a really good idea on what the benchmark is and what's achievable. So we can use this data to problem shoot, but they can also use it on a daily basis. And like the feedback from farmers is that it made a huge difference into how they managed. They were able to try things like things themselves to see what difference it made in terms of response, because it's really responsive. So the turnaround time from a good day to making changes, you'll see those changes come through in 1 to 2 days. So it's really responsive.
So when you actually have a look at this dashboard, your recommendation would be what? Is it to leave all cows in once a day for 10 days, or would you be looking at some other metrics to consider?
So this, I guess this is more once of, because I'll show you, the next slide would be a farm that has decided that they want to do twice a day costumes, ignoring that. This is a very similar dashboard which allows them to monitor that transition as well. So I guess once they've made a management decision, then it's about how do we alter that daily implementation of that management decision based on the data that we're seeing to improve the outcome. And then I guess similar here with our twice a day mobs, essentially this top row in the middle here is saying, right, out at 30 days plus, we've got 70 of 250 cows that are 30 days plus, and 70 of them are struggling. And this is probably more the picture that we saw on the twice a day transition, and I'll show you some more data later. So probably more people are going to swap to this kind of approach next year. And within this, we did tweak some in terms of timing. So some, like the first one, the grey line I talked about, went 14 days. We had some try 6 to 8, or 6 days on heifers and 8 days on others. So there was a bit of a variation. Any more questions on that?
No, that's good. I'll let you carry on.
Okay. So yeah, so that allowed us to, I mean, it was really good for us as vets because we got to engage with to make some real changes on a transition area, which, I mean, we've known for years it's hugely important, but this has allowed us to learn lots of tweaks, and it was really good for our non-collar clients too, because we got to pass on the data that was, I guess, coming through. So then we are now in the stage of, once you've gone through transition, your next key thing is going to be your cycling of your pre-mating heats. And so what we set down again with Allflex and created was, out of the box, your pretty much all these systems will work absolutely fine. You plug them in, it'll draft your on-heat cows, it'll tell you what your sick cows are, and some of them will give you rumination rates. But what we wanted to do, I think, as a practice was say, one of the key things we want to do is follow in real time how the performance of the farm is going in terms of especially pre-mate heats, so that we can, I guess, not be reactive but proactive in terms of helping out our clients. So the next report that we helped set up was this one here, which follows. So the top line is all early calvers, so these are all August calvers. The next line is all out to September the 23rd, and the final one is late calvers, so after the 23rd of September. And so what this means is they're always, those cows that had those calving dates are always in this row, but they can only be in one of these 4 boxes. So we can follow them as they go from no heat, so post calving, having a pre-mate heat, to being submitted, to a return. So it allows us to see, how is this farm tracking in real time? Because one of the issues we have with, say, even pre-mate heats, both pre-mate heats and submission rate, is our spread of calving across our practices is hugely variable. So what we really want to know, instead of just submission rate or cycling rate, is early calvers should cycle faster than late calvers. If you're a herd with a really good calving spread and no late calvers, we expect more cows to cycle. But yeah, we take this across, so most of our clients have this on their dashboards now. And what it's enabled us to do is benchmark the percentage of, so at the moment we're benchmarking August calvers, so benchmarking what percentage of those cows have had a heat to X date. So this is from, I think this was from late last week, or maybe actually might have been the 23rd of September. So we're able to, so every one of these farms is one of our collar farms with the dashboard that we just showed, and the median at that date was 46% of those cows had cycled. If you see the real outlier is this one in gold on the right, which is a Jersey full year once a day herd. So I think they were sitting at 93% at that point. So just zooming out of the blocks. If you could see I guess one of the things we're already seeing is the twice a day colostrums with once a day. So the once a days are in grey. All of our twice a day colostrums of the ones that have collars on are in the bottom half of performers at the moment. I guess more critically, by having a benchmark, A, we understand what's normal, but then B, we've actually sat down with every single one of these farms in this lower half to try and work out, what are the differentials that could be going wrong, which is mainly around nutrition, trace elements, disease, and then actually working through with them using the data that we're getting from external sources like protein graphs, milk production, their feed inputs, plus the data that we're getting out of the collars in terms of the reports that you make around eating and rumination and milk production on the ones that have got it gives you this amazing ability to problem solve and work out where improvements can be made. And then I guess the cool thing about it is that we're doing this, we've been doing this from mid-September, so we've seen, we've engaged with them probably instead of when we probably would have done it at, say, week 3 into mating, traditionally when people's submission rates are suddenly poor. Now we're doing it pre-mating. And I think, well, if we go back to this graph, hopefully you've caught up by now. If we go way back to this graph, then if we look at this bottom herd, we now know that this bottom herd has had really good recovery over the transition period. So it's significant, I should have put it in the graph here, but I can show you the difference between the 2 years is chalk and cheese in terms of that recovery rate. And we know that their pre-mating cycling is going really well. So we already know that some of the changes that we've implemented have made a big difference. And then conversely, I was just at this farm on the very far left this morning, and while they can be difficult discussions to have because you're presenting some pretty startling data, it was a good way to get some really good discussions going with their nutritionists, with us around differentials and working through some issues. And one of the cool things we're going to get off the back of this is that we'll actually be able to show the spread of days until first heat event across, say 50 farms that are working collars in our practice. So we'll get to know what's normal, what's achievable, and what, I guess, bad looks like, or not bad, but poor performance looks like, and what the actual gap in performance is. So we're also then engaging with our clients to say, right, a lot of them are using sex semen, forward pack, and low say beef straws to low BW animals. And we know that, say, with things like the mating window, the heat index, plus the BW data, and whether they've had a previous cycle, that we can build a really good way to pick, I guess, the real winners in terms of conception rate for these more expensive straws, I'll say sex semen. So we've got spreadsheets built where it will calculate, say if they've got 10 straws per day, they can drop their heat report into this file, and it will spit out the best animals to mate on a daily basis. So it just gives you the ability to do more than just BW and really try and back your winners to get more of those ones pregnant. Health is a really big winner that you can make out of it, and people really love the health output. So essentially, that is one of those boxes where some wizardry in the background is pulling in all of the background data to kind of say, how abnormal is it from its normal, how much has the rumination dropped, has it done compared to its herd mates and activity change and stuff like that. Then you pick up two major things. So the black cows on this one are what we call distress alerts. So those are kind of, go check this cow now, or, it could be dead if you don't go in the morning. So those are, you see a lot of them around calving events, prolonged downers, and down cows eventually, and just really sick cows. And then didn't include this in the slide, but one of the things you find is that in terms of picking up sick cows, it is they're just incredible. Like they're way more sensitive than humans. So what we've done is work with our clients to work out ways to work through these animals so we get the best outcome.
Ryan, could you just go back to that previous slide in terms of health alert decision tree? So I'm just trying to draw a line here in terms of the technology being able to assist in terms of drawing through or identifying some of those health areas you've identified within this graphic.
Yep. So there are a few things that will show up that might say major changes in activity would probably be more likely to indicate lameness, but I mean, you're probably going to pick up lameness pretty visually easily anyway. So I think the holy grail eventually is to make more of this diagnosis happen within the collar. But I think a lot of these, what it's doing is saying, this cow isn't eating as well as it was. It isn't moving around as well as it was. And these are, like Metch metrialis, so Metch checks, especially around spring, are a huge, probably a major contributor to a lot of these, and subclinical metabolic issues. So the technology will detect them. There's still quite a lot of human input in terms of fixing them, I guess, and diagnosing them.
Thanks, Ryan.
So then rumination, I'll just touch on quickly. So that's, the next step that we're looking at right at the moment. So you can monitor really well in terms of what's the consistency of feeding, but there are some big fluctuations in terms of, if I go to this one, so this one here is just mapping daily production versus daily rumination. And on the whole, if you're feeding a pretty consistent diet, so if you're on a TMR, then your production would track up and down really well with your rumination. In the New Zealand situation, it's a little bit more difficult, because if we go into, say, one of these spikes here, if we went into a really lush second round grass paddock, which has got low fibre, your rumination rates are going to drop, but your production might lift. And conversely, on this right side, if we went into, for some reason, had to graze a first round paddock again with a high fibre content, then often our production would drop. So there is, we're working on some stuff at the moment to try and match up some ME and predictors there. But you can use it.
Sorry, Ryan, can you go back to that last? Sorry, what's the blue line and the orange line? What are they supposed to represent?
So one is looking at the variation in daily rumination. So I think that might be the blue line. Yep. And then the other one is looking at the daily milk production. So this was taken, I think, autumn, when we're seeing a lot more variation in quality in pasture, and the swings in some of these days in terms of daily production was around the 150 kgs milk solids a day. So those kind of differences really rack up. So the next holy grail is how do we match those up? But
so how do you, so what should you be looking for when you present a graph like this? Is it the gaps between the daily rumination and daily production areas? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense, Ryan.
This is the one that you would track on a daily basis. So I'll talk over this one in terms of what you look for. So say this here is looking at the last 30 days of rumination for these cows and milk. I haven't got it expanded, but the higher, so green is usually, I guess, to a degree good, so higher rumination. and then as you drop down into yellows, you're getting lower, and eventually you get into your oranges and reds, so it's getting lower and lower and lower. Now, to a degree, this is natural as you come into second round grass, so it's lusher and fibre, so you're going to see this drop. We're watching for two major things. So in first round grass, when we were quite stable in rumination, we were looking at this 30-day rumination or this daily rumination to see if we stayed pretty even with the day before, or if we've seen huge fluctuations and we've got reasonably consistent grass quality, then often that's just a really early indicator that your allocation is not what you've got on paper. So, you know, a lot of these we've gone out to problem solve. They'll tell us they're feeding 15 kgs of grass, divided, it's in one paddock over 3 days, so the grass consistency, it should be almost exactly the same. But you'll see massive variations in rumination. We go out there to problem solve and measure the break sizes, and instead of being 3 equal break sizes, they're 3 very unequal break sizes. So it's really highly, it's been a really early precursor to seeing, I guess, inaccurate allocation has been one of the main ones. But also you can, a couple of people are using these when they've seen major dips, when they think their allocation is right. It might be an indication that, especially when they look at their milk docket and it backs it up, that is a paddock that they'll put into the resowing list because it's, you know, they're ruminating poorly on it, or ruminating really high, so it's poor quality, and the milk production drops.
So these reports that you're presenting, which are great, are they just available for your clients, or are they available to Allflex? Sorry, clients that actually use Allflex technology?
So some of these ones are presented, so anything around rumination, health, mating, a lot of those are available. Some of them, so the ones which we are, I guess, benchmarking off, we've created, and but we've been creating them with Allflex. So they will be doing an announcement sometime over the next kind of 6 months in terms of rolling those out wider as an offering. They probably take a little bit more setup in terms of fine tuning to the farm system, because the out of the box things, say like these 30-day ruminations, are often based on the seasonal system. So you're calving year round overseas, so you need reports that are active all the time and can be looked at any time of the year. When we get into our kind of more, I guess, seasonal based calving, I guess that's where we've tried to interact with Allflex to create these other ones which maybe give us a little bit more data that we can use on a seasonal basis. So they will be offered eventually.
Thanks, Ryan.
And that is all I have today.
Okay, hey, look, thank you very much, Ryan. I appreciate there's a lot to digest, and I'm sure that if members have any questions, they can go back to you in terms of getting behind the technology. But in the interim, I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of what other aspects of cow collar technology are you looking at to improve animal performance?
Yeah, I guess the real holy grail one that we're just doing some work on over this next couple of weeks is around getting a better handle on what rumination rates are for certain feeds. We can do it, but we're just taking some samples and doing some calculations at the moment. Because I guess going back to that point that we talked about before with feed allocation, is that we continually get told when we go to like look into issues, you know, that, you know, we're feeding 15 kgs, we're feeding 17 kgs, but we want to know, is there a way that we can, I guess, objectively measure that might be a little bit more accurate than the kind of variable plate metering and guessing allocation size that's going on at the moment. So that's one of the things. Probably the next areas that we're working on is trying to, we've got a few of these farms with milk hub meters, and trying to work the data that's coming out of that in terms of what we can do in terms of adding some more onto the stuff we just talked about, but also look at, can we use it to dry off poor performance early, or alert probably feed quality changes maybe more sensitively in terms of the ME value than we're seeing with just rumination rate. And then I guess the final one that we're just looking at is automating some post PD reports, so that we get kind of a baseline benchmark across, say, 50 farms in terms of their performance, time to first heat, conception rate to different mating windows, how their transition performs, so that we can actually say, right, objectively, here are some of the key things that these farms did that these farms didn't, and here is their outcome. And we can show, you know, more than just guess what happened. We can show in real time what happened in terms of rumination rate and eating time and stuff. So yeah, those are our big work ons at the moment.
So what's the approximate cost of this technology? We'll just talk about the Allflex technology. And do you have a sense in terms of the payback period, in terms of time and the base of investment made to actually see a financial return?
Yeah. So I'm never involved in the meetings where they have with clients, but it's usually somewhere, depending on herd size, I think between the $30 and $40 mark per animal per year, approximately. And in terms of payback, so when I was first looking at them in terms of financials last year, I did a lot of really conservative estimates, where I looked at only things that I could 100% quantify based on our retrospective data. So I looked at savings on bull numbers, savings on scratchies, and on the rotary ones, a little bit of saving on time. Looked at low heat index scores, so there's ones sitting between the 32 and 50 mark. In my analysis, I said, right, I'm going to assume that your heat detection is perfect, and then the only cows that you're missing is these low heat index scores. And I said, right, for the health ones, I took a sample of some really good recording farms across a huge range, and looked at the death rate over spring, and said, right, which of these conditions could the collars have helped us with? And then said, right, if we had a 5, 10, 15 or 20% reduction in death rate, what would that look like financially? And finally looked at, say, just if we got some improvements at a really conservative, say 1 kg milk solid a cow, what would that look like? If you do all that, which is hugely conservative, you would definitely break even. So, so it's, and like say, if we go back to this, then it all comes down to what your current performance is and what's your limiting factor. And then, like, if you look at the farms down here, what you then do with the data, which will make a big difference. But say these top 2 farms, their days in milk range from between the 2 seasons was worth $110,000 on a $24,000 a year cost. So I mean, there's more than, well, got a 4 times fold return on investment in the first year, but that's going to vary very much farm by farm.
Okay, final question, Ryan, because we're just running out of time. In terms of the next technological advance, maybe beyond cow collars, what do you think that will be in terms of monitoring animal health?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say more in-shed stuff will be the next thing. Like, I suspect we've only just started looking at this milk data, but between the milk data and, well, actually, what I'd really like to do, there's near or NIR portable technology for feed analysis. And I almost wonder if that's going to be maybe a key part if they can get the technology cheap enough for like forward planning and better feed provisions. So we're just going to try work with a company shortly on that as part of this trial.
That's great. Hey, look, thank you very much, Ryan, for providing an outline on how your clients are using electronic cow collar technology to make better on-farm decisions. So thanks, great presentation. So that brings a close to this webinar. So thanks for joining us this afternoon, and bye everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.